Well, it's Friday, so that means we'll turn to the week that was in Canadian politics. And with me to go over some of those top stories are two colleagues from the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Kristy Kirkup is a reporter with the Canadian Press, and Kelsey Johnson is a reporter with iPolitics. Thanks to both of you for being here. Thanks. Let's begin with the news from today, which is, of course, the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal issuing its reference decision saying that the federal government does, in fact, have the jurisdiction to impose that federal carbon backstop despite the opposition of the Moe government. Kristy, let me start with you. It's only been one day, but how does the decision change the political conversation going forward on this issue, which is, of course, going to be so central this year in the campaign?
For sure. We did see the Environment Minister, Catherine McKenna, of course, coming out here in Ottawa and praising the court's decision. Not a surprise there with the 3-2 decision that, of course, upholds the constitutionality of the federal carbon tax. And she says it's a win for future generations. And I think that kind of gives us an indication of where the Liberals will be going in terms of their message on this. And we have seen with the changing dynamics in terms of obviously the carbon tax is not just a fight in Saskatchewan, it's also a fight that's playing out in Ontario. Alberta's premier has been a fierce opponent as well of the federal carbon tax. And so for Catherine McKenna, again, this is good news. And also she's trying to lay out that there's a choice about addressing climate change, taking it seriously, pointing to demonstrators on Parliament Hill, young people on Parliament Hill expressing concern over climate change, and really trying to deliver a message about why the government, again, is moving forward with this particular measure.
And Kelsey, what do you think? Because certainly, a court decision on paper is one thing, but public opinion is another. And when you're looking at people in Western Canada, especially, does a decision like this really change public opinion on the ground when it comes to supporting or opposing the federal government on this?
I would say probably unlikely. It was definitely a win for the Trudeau government at a time when they needed a win. They've been on the defensive for a number of months, and to have a decision of this nature come in their favor, even if it is a split 3-2 decision, is a win. But obviously, given Premier Moe's response this afternoon, it's very clear that they believe that the carbon tax is going to be the issue in the election, and the public opinion is not going to change. And you still have a number of other decisions that are coming down. You've got Ontario, whether or not the Supreme Court will even agree to hear this. And so this might be one decision and a win for the Liberals, but it's not an end to the debate by any stretch of the imagination.
And Kristy, it does potentially offer an interesting dynamic. We've heard some analysis suggesting that in Ontario during the campaign, really it's going to be Doug Ford who's going to be kind of the central antagonist for Justin Trudeau. With this carbon tax fight continuing, it's not over in Saskatchewan. We know that there's a new government, Alberta. Do we now see perhaps these conservative premiers emerging as key players in this year's run-up to the campaign and the campaign itself?
Definitely. I think that whether you're talking about Jason Kenney, which of course as a Harper-era cabinet minister, he has made it abundantly clear, first of all, that he was not a fan of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. In fact, his dislike for Pierre Elliott Trudeau helped to propel his pursuit of politics in the first place. And he's been very outspoken about the carbon tax, and was during his own provincial election campaign, meeting with the Prime Minister, being polite, but also, again, suggesting that Justin Trudeau is creating a national unity crisis as well. He's a disruptor in politics, as is Doug Ford in Ontario. And we've seen this interesting dynamic play out where Justin Trudeau is going to have to take on the joint forces of premiers like Kenney and Ford, who are very outspoken, and again, they're going to be staging quite a political fight over this existential question, if you will, over the carbon tax and over the state of how to address climate change specifically.
And Kelsey, speaking of Jason Kenney, of course, he was here yesterday on Parliament Hill. He was talking about the potential of national unity being in jeopardy over Bill C-69 and the impact assessment process. So, tell me how you think that kind of message kind of enters the fray now in this overall debate that we're having over pipelines, over environmental assessment, over carbon pricing?
Look, I don't think you can underestimate the anger in Western Canada, and I don't think you can underestimate the sentiment that Western alienation is definitely at least a very strong political play, whether or not whether or not it's playing out in real life is up for debate. But Premier Kenney came, he played a similar card that Premier Notley had played, which is Alberta is vehemently opposed to this bill. Notley called it a stampede of stupid when she was here. Kenney upped it and said if this bill goes through in its regular form, we're going to make a constitutional challenge. That type of rhetoric and that type of language plays out very well in Alberta, especially when you've been going through a recession in the last 2 years. You've got lots of people who are not working full time. The oil industry is still struggling. And I don't think you can discredit or ignore the anger that is coming from Western Canada. And generally speaking, in terms of the support that not only does Mr. Kenney have on his position on C-69, but you've seen similar remarks around pipeline construction from some of the other Western premiers as well.
And so let's turn then to another big story this week, and it's certainly one that involves a lot of people in Alberta and in Saskatchewan, and that is the federal government's pledge to extend some additional financial support to canola farmers who are being affected by China's ban on imports. Kelsey, I know you've been following this quite closely, so does what the government announced this week go far enough in alleviating some of that short-term anxiety that producers are feeling?
Well, it is very similar to what the federal government has been asked to do for the last month. Saskatchewan came out a month ago and said, you need to increase the loan limit on this program. The program is the Agriculture Canada's Advanced Payments Program. It's a long-standing program. It's widely used across Western Canada or across the agriculture sector by farmers. And there has been a long-standing ask to actually increase the limit on this loan to make it useful. So what Ottawa has done is they've upped the limit to $1 million for everybody. And then there's a special contingent of $500,000 of interest-free money, specifically for canola growers. Now, the details as to how that will be rolled out and that kind of thing is still being sorted out. But in the short term, it will definitely help ease cash flow concerns. The long-term question is whether or not producers will be able to pay that loan back. If the market does not settle itself, if canola prices do not at least stabilize, there are some questions as to whether or not farmers would be able to pay it back, but that is a more longer-term question, and in the short term, it deals with the cash flow issues.
And Kristy, we seem to hear, we almost seem like we're hearing the word China more than the United States when it comes to our diplomatic relations right now and trade. The Conservatives have certainly been pressing for the Trudeau government to go even beyond this, be more aggressive, to appoint a new ambassador, to withdraw infrastructure bank funding. Have we seen any indication that the government is prepared to go beyond what they've announced? They did say they're going to expand trade missions, but will that Conservative push for more direct, more aggressive pressure find any agreement within the Liberal government?
Well, the International Trade Diversification Minister, Jim Carr, was asked that very question on Parliament Hill this week, and he pretty much said that it is important to continue to engage with China. He was specifically asked about why don't you take a more hardline approach, because there has been, that critique, if you will, that the government should be, the Canadian government should be more forcefully pushing back in response to what China is doing, specifically with blocking canola from two very large producers. But again, he's suggesting that we kind of need to play ball. We need to have an ongoing conversation. The debate is whether or not that's working, because he can again point to the fact that there's continued conversations, or at least the attempt to have conversations with China. It doesn't seem like that's as I say, a successful push. And then, of course, because he's the trade diversification minister, he's trying to go out and shore up relationships with other countries. And he says he's going to be talking about the importance of canola on, a junket to Japan. Japan already takes a lot of canola. I don't know how much.
So they take about 2 million tons of canola a year. They're a very stable market. They don't buy a lot of extra canola. They buy about the same every year. South Korea's canola purchases are not insignificant, but they're not a major market. And on this, there is a very big, strong push within both Conservative Party and also industry to take this to WTO. This is what WTO dispute resolution is designed for. We've taken the U.S. to WTO on 232 tariffs, and the similar action hasn't been taken on canola. And if you look in terms of Canada's relationship with China, the list of agricultural products particularly that Canada is having issues with now, and the argument is that these are just administrative issues, but if you look at the issues, we have 2 major Canadian grain companies that have lost their export permits. We've got 2 pork companies now who have lost their export permits, arguably over a labeling concern. That's the official line. You've got 2 livestock genetic companies now who have been unable to get their export permits renewed in order to get their livestock genetics into China. There's concerns around peas, there's concerns around soybeans, and the list is growing. And the argument is, well, we appreciate the science-based conversation, and no one is disputing the need to talk at the science level. The fact of the matter is that the Canadian government asked a month ago to send the president of the CFIA to China. She's a senior bureaucrat in this country, and that request has not been acknowledged yet. So at what point do you draw the line and you say, look, we deserve to be able to come and talk to you about this issue? And that patience is running out within the farm community and definitely within the Conservative caucus as well.
All right, well, they're waiting to talk, but we're out of time in our conversation. So thanks to both of you and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.